When the critical part of my story began, I was 30 years old, married to the love of my life, Nancy, who was 32. We had two charming daughters, aged 5 and 6, and we had been married for 8 years. I remember praising myself for the right decisions I made in life. This included who I chose as friends in high school and college, the college I attended, the business I decided to pursue, the company I chose to work for, and most importantly, marrying Nancy. The best decision in my life. I met Nancy in the first semester of my college at a business course where she was a graduate assistant. She was beautiful, sensual, smart, and funny. I don't know for sure what her first impression of me was, but my first impression of her was, wow. I made sure to excel in all aspects of the course she was a graduate assistant for, and during the lab sessions she led, I made sure to ask only reasonable guiding questions. Towards the end of the semester, I could tell she was interested by the language of her body. On the first day of the second semester, I asked her out on a date. We had a whirlwind romance, and we got married 2 months after I graduated from college. One thing I quickly learned about Nancy was that she was very stubborn and impossible to manipulate or even reason with if she wanted something. This was not a problem for me, although she admitted it was a serious issue with men she had been involved with before we met. However, what was a problem for me was her obvious need to win at everything, but I loved her so much that I learned to cope with it. After college, I quickly landed a job in the marketing department of a Fortune 500 company, and by the time I turned 29, I was a vice president of a Fortune 1500 company. Despite her intelligence, Nancy's foray into the business world was not met with success. She was an excellent teacher, but something was missing when it came to applying what she knew in the real world. However, I believe it was precisely her straightforward personality that was her main shortcoming. So, she returned to academia and at the age of 32 became a professor at a prestigious university approximately 15 kilometers from our home. My married life was remarkable not only because my wife and I had a job we loved but also because we had wonderful children with whom it was a joy to interact. We genuinely had loving relationships, and my sexual life was better than I had ever imagined when I was young. With the exception of periods that occurred approximately every 6 months when Nancy and I mysteriously experienced a surge in libido, leading us to behave like cats in heat for about 10 consecutive days, we regularly enjoyed lovemaking, which included experimenting. Nancy was particularly aroused when pregnant, and she required servicing every day, right up to the day she gave birth to each baby. I was a satisfied, content cowboy. At the outset of writing this story, I considered my second best decision ever in my entire story to be hiring Alicia, my secretary, whom I had worked with for 3 years. It could have been a genuinely bad decision because, frankly, Alicia was not really suited for the job when I hired her. I'm not entirely sure what factors motivated me to hire her, but some were related to her tragic past, incredible femininity, strong desire to succeed, as well as the fact that she had to support a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old child, despite being only 23 when I hired her. Alicia turned out to be so intelligent that, if she didn't have the disadvantages I had as a child, she could easily have obtained a doctoral degree in practically any subject she desired. Although her verbal skills were not better than those of her classmates when I hired her, over the course of 18 months, she had no equal among the people I supervised when it came to verbal and interpersonal communication skills. She was also highly organized, worked as diligently as one could expect from a single mother, and became the most reliable person I knew. Just to prove to myself that my perception of her was correct, under the guise of a corporate requirement that all employees must take a certain test, I manipulated her into taking an IQ test. She scored 135, significantly higher than the average college graduate, despite only having completed 10th grade education. My carefree, chubby, figuratively, not literally, as I am 190 centimeters tall with a weight of 88 kilograms, naive existence came to an end 15 days after my 30th birthday. On that Monday morning, I received a call from the school where my 6-year-old daughter was in 1st grade. Because the school was near the university where Nancy worked, she could drop off and pick up the children almost every day. Since Mondays and Wednesdays were her busiest days, I was the primary contact person for the children on those days, so they called me instead of her. If the same thing had happened on a Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday, I might never have found out. My 6-year-old, Elizabeth, simply had some minor stomach issues, but I thought I should take her to the pediatrician's office just in case it was something more serious. I called Nancy to consult with her, but she switched to voicemail. Knowing Nancy's schedule and that she could only have a 10-minute break during the day and where her office was located, I headed to the university as it was on the way to the pediatrician's office, intending to inform Nancy or her secretary. Was Nancy there? That's another story. Imagine my surprise when, approaching the building where her office was located, through the almost concealed side entrance that was never used, I saw Nancy in passionate embrace with another man. I abruptly stopped the car. I looked long enough to see his hands on her buttocks and one of her palms between them at his groin level. I took one photo of them in each other's arms with a high-resolution digital camera. I took a second photo when they broke apart with big smiles on their very noticeable and recognizable faces, then drove my daughter to the doctor's office. I was so shocked that if it had been any other doctor's office besides the pediatrician's, they probably would have assumed that medical assistance was needed for me, not Elizabeth. Fortunately, Elizabeth's problem turned out to be so insignificant that the doctor allowed her to return to school after lunch. Elizabeth and I went to a diner and had lunch together, sharing her favorite sandwich since I didn't have much of an appetite, and then I took her back to school. When I returned to work, I found my voicemail messages from Alicia, then quickly entered my office and closed the door. When Alicia realized I didn't respond to her 3 urgent calls, she knocked on the door and entered. "What happened, Blake? You look as pale as a ghost. Was there something serious with Elizabeth's health?" she asked. No, I blurted out too quickly. She just had some minor stomach issues, and after lunch, I took her back to school. "Then why do you look like a zombie?" Alicia asked. "You could tell me. You know I'll eventually pry it out of you." Perhaps she was right, but then I wasn't in the mood to talk about it. "Nothing serious. Probably just the same minor stomach issues I had, like Elizabeth." Alicia didn't buy it, but she left my office, and I spent the rest of the day behind closed doors. Actually, working is an euphemism because I got damn little done. That evening, I pretended to have stomach trouble like Elizabeth in front of Nancy. After eating half of my dinner and playing with the kids for about an hour, I told Nancy that I was feeling unwell and, just in case what I had was contagious, I would sleep in the guest bedroom. I went to the guest bedroom, but I couldn't just go to sleep. I needed to figure out what to do. Inaction wasn't an option, but a nuclear explosion with the destruction of our family wasn't an option either. I somehow made it through the week without directly confronting the issue. My plan involved doing it on Saturday morning, using my fake illness for another day, a fake business trip for 2 more, which I spent in a local hotel, and a night at Nancy's parents' house. In principle, it worked, though Nancy had a very suspicious look on her face, especially when I didn't go to bed on Friday night for what she clearly hoped would be an intense sex session. I said I needed to work on the computer for about an hour. "What happened, Blake?" Nancy asked, dressed in her most alluring negligee, as I sat behind the laptop in the office. Giving her just one glance, I replied, "We'll talk about it tomorrow morning, and then I'll take the kids to the zoo so you'll have some time to think." "Why can't we talk about it now?" "Because, damn it, I don't want to talk about it now, that's why. So just fuck off to bed." It was the first time I had ever spoken to her like that in all our years together. The last time I looked at her, she had wide open eyes, but soon she left. I slept in the guest room again. Nancy looked like crap the next morning. In accordance with the arrangements I made 2 days earlier, I sent the kids to play with the teenage girl who often watches over them, promising to head to the zoo within half an hour. As soon as the kids went out the door, Nancy began. "How could you talk to me like that last night?" That's all she managed to say before I yelled, "Shut up, Nancy. Our conversation will consist of me talking and you listening." This got her attention, and she leaned back in the kitchen chair. "I don't know how long you've been having an affair, why, or what his name is, but frankly, it really pisses me off," I continued. Nancy opened her mouth, as if she were about to deny it, but I slammed my palm on the kitchen table, and she thought better of it. "That's what will happen if you want to stay married. If I ever get any indication that any of our friends or family know about it, I will file the papers the next day. Same if you ever bring him or them into this house." She flinched at the word, "they." "Until I have proof that the affair or affairs are over, you show me a health certificate from the STD testing lab, and tell me how I can regain trust in you, I will sleep in the guest bedroom. When I come back with the kids today, if you haven't told me you're filing for divorce immediately, I intend for our family life to continue as it was before Monday, but we won't be having sex until my 3 conditions are met." With those words, I grabbed the car keys and left. Luckily, it's hard to wallow in depression with young kids around, especially when they're having such a great time at the zoo, so I almost forgot about our situation until returning late that same day. Nancy wasn't home when we arrived. She came back about an hour later, just as I was finishing up cooking spaghetti, meatballs, and salad, to the best of my culinary abilities. She was dressed not in her usual Saturday mom attire, but in a form-fitting dress and heels. After Nancy changed, we had a fairly typical family dinner. After I washed the dishes post-dinner, we played a standard Saturday night family game, watched a children's DVD until one fell asleep, and the other could barely keep their eyes open, and each of us prepared a child for bed and tucked them in. Once the kids were safely tucked in, I changed into my biking gear and set off on a 1-hour night bike ride. When I got back home, Nancy was watching a movie in the living room. She paused the movie, came into the kitchen where I was chugging a liter of iced tea, and said, "We need to talk some more." "No, we don't," I said nonchalantly. Then I went upstairs, took a shower, and went to bed in the guest room. I made sure to lock the door. I heard a knock on it, but tried to ignore it. When it persisted, I turned on the air purifier to drown out the background noise. We had essentially a typical Sunday. I even held Nancy's hand as we walked to church. That day, we went with the kids to a family barbecue with friends, and if anyone there could tell that Nancy and I had issues, they certainly didn't show it. However, I subtly questioned a number of my friends and family members, just to see if there was any chance they knew anything about Nancy's affair. Either my inquiries were too subtle, or no one had the slightest clue. Nancy approached me a few times during the barbecue and hugged me. I always responded with a smile on my face. Nancy made another attempt to continue the conversation on Sunday evening, but I responded to it with another night bike ride and then, after showering, immediately went to bed in the guest room. Many people may wonder why I chose the approach I took with Nancy. There were many reasons for this. Two main ones were that the thought of not being with my kids every day saddened me greatly, and considering how stubborn Nancy was, she could easily push my buttons. We would have had a confrontation from which neither of us would have recovered, and the marriage would have collapsed. I thought that over time the marriage could be saved, but only if I took a firm stand while avoiding a nuclear meltdown. I truly believe that over the next 3 weeks, everyone we knew was fooled into thinking that Nancy and I had the same relationship as before that fateful day. Except for Alicia. Alicia had something like a sixth sense, radar, intuition, or something like that, because she wasn't fooled for a single day. One of the procedures I initiated when I became the vice president of marketing was to cut work in half on Fridays every 2 weeks during the summer. It had such a beneficial effect on morale that during those 34.5 hours that people in my department worked over those weeks, I achieved higher productivity than during a regular 40-hour workweek. On a Friday, about 3 weeks after the incident, everyone else had left except Alicia when she entered my office around 1:30. "Come clean, Blake. I'm not leaving until you do," she said, plopping down in the chair across from my desk. At first, I tried to feed her excuses, but she wasn't buying any of it. "I know you need to wrap up a contract with Jenkins before you leave here today. This is a very comfortable chair, and I won't leave or let you do any work on the Jenkins contract until you come clean about everything." Her crossed arms and legs and her intense, cobra-like stare left no doubt that she intended to do what she said. So, I told her everything. "How long is this going to go on?" she asked. "I have no idea," I honestly replied. "So, it's been over 3 weeks without sex for you?" "More or less. I've told you that you pay me enough money, especially with your overly generous Christmas bonuses, that I was able to rent a small house, and now my aunt, the only worthwhile member of my family, is living with me as a live-in nanny?" I was a bit surprised that she brought up such an inappropriate topic. No, I didn't know that, but I'm glad you feel adequately compensated. I've told you it's been 5 months without sex for me, and that the last time wasn't satisfying, right?" she said, spreading her legs and thighs. I mumbled, "That's too much information, Alicia." "Actually, it's not, Blake. Your current situation has given me the opportunity I've been looking for the past 2 years. A chance to change our relationship. You won't be in town next Tuesday evening next week, and you'll take me with you. If you don't do that, you can start looking for a new secretary from Wednesday onwards, after which I'll notify you in 2 weeks." After that stunning statement, she got up, walked around the desk, and planted on me the most passionate kiss that I had ever received in my life. Then she turned and headed for the door. Just before stepping out the door, she said, I know all about the company's policies regarding affairs and sexual harassment. I also know how to handle them. I sat at my desk stunned for the better part of an hour. By the time I had thought it all through, I realized that one of the reasons I might have hired Alicia was that I sensed in her a hidden sexuality that contributed to her incredible femininity. Though Alicia wasn't as beautiful or sensual as Nancy, I had to admit she had a factor that couldn't be properly analyzed but could provoke a strong sexual reaction. I needed to think things over carefully. By Monday, I had several questions and a few decisions based on how those questions would be answered. First thing, I called Alicia into my office, closed and locked the door. "Were you serious on Friday?" "Never more serious in my life. You know, I have 2 young children. I probably won't divorce. What if I reconcile with Nancy and I won't have sex with anyone else but her? I know that. I'm not asking you to fall in love with me. I'm asking you to use me for your sexual satisfaction until your situation changes the way you want it to. How do we get around the policy on affairs and sexual harassment?" I talked to my friend, an employment lawyer, who assures me that everything will be fine if we both sign waivers and commit to confidentiality. If the company tries to enforce the policy against us, we can win in court. Moreover, we both know enough about each other's characters to understand that we can be completely discreet and can trust each other when it comes to honest actions towards each other. If the worst happens, with your brilliant recommendation, I'll find a job somewhere else. I looked at Alicia for a long time, without blinking. She looked back at me. I slowly approached her, grabbed her, and kissed her as passionately as she kissed me on Friday, caressing her buttocks with one hand and her breast with the other. When we broke the embrace, I said, "Get the waiver from your lawyer friend and arrange a joint trip for us on Tuesday. Book 2 rooms in the hotel on different floors, but you won't be using yours." Alicia had a wide smile on her face. She turned and walked out the door, giving herself a pat on the backside before leaving my office. For the rest of the day, no one could feel that anything had changed in our relationship. On Tuesday, Alicia and I behaved very professionally in the limousine to the airport, on the plane to our destination, and in the taxi from the airport to the hotel. After we got our separate keys at the hotel check-in counter, Alicia slipped a $5 bill to the bellhop and asked him to take her suitcases to her room, and we would divide them later. Then she grabbed my hand and led me to the elevator. As we rode up in the elevator, the look she gave me must have been the most passionate gaze in human history. I really don't know how she did it, but within 2 minutes of entering my room, she stripped off all her clothes, all the while kissing or rubbing against me with her hands. While I played with her surprisingly large, considering the conservative clothing she always wore to work, breasts, she pulled down my pants and boxers. "No foreplay this time. I've been waiting for this for 2 years and can't wait any longer," she said. With those words, she jumped into my arms, and I stumbled slightly, pressing my back against the wall. I thought Nancy was passionate. Alicia was in a different league. Somehow we made it to the bed without tripping or falling flat on our faces. Between quick kisses on my lips, she said, "That was really good. Even better than I thought, and that really says something." After thoroughly exploring each other's naked bodies for erogenous zones, I brought her to climax twice. Then we went to Alicia's room. I picked up my suitcase and carried it to the room while she changed for dinner. When we met in the lobby, I was stunned. Who is this sexy demon that has taken over the body of my conservative secretary? I smirked. "Do you like it?" "Understatement of the year," I snorted. "Remember, Blake, no signs of affection." "Got it," I smiled. Then we entered the hotel dining room, not touching each other, and while we were having our dinner, we tried our best not to look like we had just had sex. After dinner, we went for a walk in the local park, and as soon as it got dark, we did have physical contact. When we returned to the hotel, we went to our respective rooms and called our families. About half an hour after I finished talking to Nancy and the kids, Alicia knocked on my door. Alicia and I gently and slowly undressed each other. Then we got into bed, but we didn't have sex. In fact, we made love. Alicia fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, and we were both truly content. After a quick and very satisfying shower sex the next morning, Alicia went back to her room and changed into her typical conservative work attire. We left our luggage with the concierge and headed to the first of our 2 meetings. There was no physical contact between us for the rest of the trip. Before the first meeting, I told Alicia that if she had any comments, she could speak freely. There was no need to pass notes or anything like that. You're smart enough to know what to say and what not to. Don't hide your light under a bushel, I said to her. She beamed broadly when I told her that. Both meetings that day went very well. Alicia was charming and intelligent, and although she played a supporting role, many of her comments were quite substantive. Both the potential business partners and suppliers we met with were very impressed with our presentations, including Alicia's. On the flight back, I voiced what I had been thinking for the past 6 months. You know, Alicia, if you went through management training, you'd make an excellent assistant marketing director and ultimately, a marketing director. In fact, in a couple of years, you could undoubtedly do my job as well as I do. Are you serious? She asked. Very serious. Of course, I would need a suitable replacement for a secretary before I would recommend you for management training. Are you sure you're not just trying to tell me that this is a good way to avoid having sex with me in the future? She whispered. What in the last 24 hours could make you believe that I didn't want to continue having sex with you? I whispered back. The widest smile I had ever seen in my life appeared on her face. Can we talk about this tomorrow? You have nothing planned from 3 to 5 in the afternoon. Tomorrow from 3 to 5 in the afternoon we will be open and discuss both management training and our future intimate relationship. The next day, Alicia and I had the strangest meeting I had ever had with anyone in my life. We meticulously planned every detail of who she could hire to replace her as my secretary when she starts management training in the company. How we will continue to meet to continue enjoying the phenomenal sex we had during our business trip, and what Alicia needs to do to position herself for success both in the business world and in our personal relationship. After that, everything happened quickly. I bought Alicia's aunt a used car so she could work as a teacher's assistant at the school where Alicia's children attended and could transport them when necessary. Alicia had a friend who worked in another department of our company, who was unhappy with her job but genuinely wanted to take over the position Alicia held. She was over 50, and although she stuck to her views, she was very competent. I had no illusions that she would be nearly as good at her job as Alicia, but I was comfortable enough to hire her. After a 2-week transition period, during which Alicia worked with my new secretary to get her up to speed, Alicia began management training. Even before she started management training, Alicia and I separately visited her home 4 or 5 days a week around lunchtime, and one fine day, we would engage in racing like animals, and the next day, we would make love. Once she started management training, her classes didn't start until 10 in the morning, and her children and aunt weren't home until 8, so we had a good hour and a half every weekday to make sure our sexual needs were taken care of. Alicia was a compassionate, energetic, captivating, and, most importantly, passionate lover. Additionally, we managed to go on overnight trips a couple of times. Only after an exceptionally delightful lovemaking marathon, when Alicia laid her head on my shoulder to fall asleep, did I consciously think, hiring Alicia was the best decision of my life. Better than marrying Nancy. Good or bad, Alicia put me in such a good mood that the fact that Nancy still showed no signs of meeting the 3 requirements I set for restoring real, sexual, marital relations worried me less and less. It was an understatement of the year, mysterious to Nancy. There were signs that Nancy had probably ended her affair, and she certainly tried various ways to lure me back to her bed, although due to her inherent stubbornness and the need to win every argument, she did not agree with what I told her was necessary. One evening, after we returned home from a party where she drank more than usual, and the children stayed overnight at her parents' house, she made every effort to seduce me. When I stepped into the shower, she joined me. I didn't kick her out, make any unpleasant remarks, or anything like that. She whimpered, "Blake, I really need you." Then do the 3 things that, as I said, were necessary, Nancy. It's either divorce, still the only 2 options, I replied. You must be getting sex elsewhere, otherwise you wouldn't refuse me for anything, she whimpered. All I need to do to refuse you, Nancy, is to imagine you cheating with your lover. With these words, I finished drying myself off, tossed the towel in the laundry basket, went to the guest room, and locked the door. Meanwhile, things with Alicia couldn't have been better. There is one particular day that will forever stay in my memory. It was a Friday, and since Alicia was finishing her training for managers that day, the ceremony, which began around noon, gave us a few extra hours at her house. After an extremely energetic session of sex, we played with each other's naked bodies and chatted in bed. Alicia was told she would receive an award at the ceremony. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out 2 gifts for her. The first was a very stylish sleeveless gray-blue dress with a lieutenant's coat, which I hoped she would wear to the ceremony. She thought it was beautiful and agreed. The second was a sapphire necklace that perfectly complemented the dress. She burst into tears. It took Alicia some time to recover from our stunning sex session, which she managed to do. By the time we parted ways, in separate cars, for the ceremony, she was extremely well put together and beautiful. At the ceremony, as a result of unanimous voting by her classmates and instructors, she received an award as the most outstanding student in the management training class. I was very proud. It had been over 6 months since my ultimatum to Nancy and just about 3 weeks since Alicia finished her management training when Nancy finally began to give in. Over the previous 2 months, there had been signs that it might happen because she seemed sad all the time, and my cheerful nature irritated her. One Wednesday evening after dinner, she said, "Blake, this Saturday we can hire a nanny and go somewhere secluded to talk about being together again as a real married couple. I fully intend to meet the 3 conditions you outlined and which I will never deviate from. Although I don't like them, I need some recommendations." "Of course, I'll take care of everything," I replied with a smile on my face. When Alicia and I met the next morning, I told her straight about my conversation with Nancy. By that time, I had genuine feelings for Alicia. It's impossible to have very satisfying, actually impressive, sexual relationships with someone you respect and not develop real feelings. However, if Nancy was indeed serious, I was especially obliged to our children to restore our marriage to normalcy. Alicia cried a little. I wiped away her tears. "I knew this day would come, Blake, and it's going to be very hard for me. But I understood the situation I was getting into, and I cherish the last few months spent with you so much that I could enjoy them for the rest of my life. But let's not waste the time we have left until your situation is completely resolved." That Saturday, Nancy and I went to a strange place, considering the type of conversation we were about to have, a minor league baseball game. There were hardly any spectators on one side of the stands, so we went and sat there. In fact, it was probably the most secluded place possible, and the atmosphere around us was more likely to reduce rather than increase stress. If things went wrong, chances are nobody would find out. Whereas, if we were in a fancy restaurant, there could have been a scene. First of all, Blake, I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. However, after my second pregnancy with Joyce, you remember how excited I was during it? She said with a pensive smile. I nodded in agreement. Sometimes I had these flashes where I either couldn't control myself or could barely control myself, and I would spontaneously orgasm, or I had to relieve myself instantly with my fingers. It was during one of these moments, in my office, that I was found by one of my married colleagues, William. I have very vague memories of the surrounding circumstances of what happened, but the gist of it is that we had extremely passionate animalistic sex. After that, whenever I had these flashes, and he was around, we would have intercourse. Nancy looked down at her hands and quietly sobbed for a few minutes. She composed herself and continued. It was almost as if I wasn't cheating on you. It felt like another world. Until you shared with me your knowledge of the situation, which I still don't understand how you got, I didn't even think about the adverse consequences. Then, when you, quite rightly, for which I don't blame you, laid down the law for me, my well-known personal flaw of always having to win arguments and my stubbornness made me strengthen my relationship with William. Instead of immediately ending it, only after 2 months of contemplation did I realize that I would lose you if I didn't start acting rationally. I went to a psychoanalyst, worked diligently on my issue, and I think I've solved it now. With these words, she pulled out a document from the envelope she held in her hands. This is William's sworn written testimony that our relationship ended almost 4 months ago. In fact, the document she handed me was a notarized sworn statement, drafted by a guy named William Montrose. Attached to the notarized sworn statement was a photograph. It was the same guy the first saw Nancy in a tight embrace with on that fateful Monday. How did you manage to get him to sign this? I asked. I told him that if he didn't do it, I would tell his wife about our affair. He really didn't want that, and after I assured him that if there were any adverse legal consequences after you reviewed the sworn statements, I would ensure his financial security, Nancy replied. I suppose he was your only lover, Nancy? Yes, I assure you, she replied, tears in her eyes. That resolves issue number 1. What about the health certificate from the venereal disease testing laboratory and how can I regain your trust? I gently inquired. With these words, she handed me a second document from the envelope. It was a complete set of disease tests. In fact, 2 different ones. The first was dated a day after William Montrose signed his sworn statement, with results provided a week later, and the second was dated 10 days ago, with results provided yesterday. Both times, she received a completely clean bill of health. That resolves problem number 2, I smiled. Point number 3. How to regain your trust is trickier, Nancy admitted. Tell me, is this enough? She asked, handing me a 2-page document. On the first page was a statement she signed for her psychiatrist, authorizing him to provide me with any information I request. The second was a notarized written testimony from the psychiatrist stating that she did not believe Nancy would stray from the path again, and that in her opinion, the issues Nancy faced, which accelerated and prolonged the affair, were no longer a problem. Is this enough? She asked expectantly. I've been pondering over this third point long and hard for the past 6 months, especially in the last few days when it seemed like Nancy was finally ready to capitulate. This is a very good start, Nancy. Perhaps it would have been enough if you had given me this a couple of weeks after we talked. However, since it took you 6 months to reach this stage, upon careful consideration, I have concluded that I require something more. I want you to sign a post-nuptial agreement stating that if you engage in another affair while we are married, I will have sole custody of our daughters, although you will have liberal visitation rights, and that I will receive the house and 60% of our marital assets. Of course, I didn't tell her, and I had no way of knowing whether she was aware of this or not, that regardless of what we discussed about custody in the post-nuptial agreement, a family court judge could override it in the best interests of the children. However, it would certainly give me an advantage in any proceedings before the family court judge if they were needed. Nancy promised to see a lawyer next week to prepare and sign the necessary documents. After that, we kissed and held hands. Once the game ended, we went to play mini golf, had dinner at a casual restaurant, and then went home and watched a DVD. Nancy was very disappointed that even though she undressed in front of me and I refused to have sex with her. Once everything is settled, I said with a sly smile, you'll get more from me than you bargained for. Sunday was a great family day. The real complication arose on Monday. I was genuinely afraid to tell Alicia that we had at most 2 days left together. I found her in tears when she opened the door that morning. What's wrong, babe? I asked, pulling her into my arms. She said something, but it was so distorted that I really didn't understand the gist of the joke. Something about it not being her fault. That she would do what I wanted, and similar nonsense. After sitting with her for a good 15 minutes, holding her hands and wiping away tears, I finally managed to understand her story. Interrupted by rare sighs and tears, it sounded something like this. My obstetrician-gynecologist made a mistake indicating the date of my next contraceptive injection. I didn't notice it myself. When I came on Saturday, the doctor noticed it before giving me the shot. She asked if I had been sexually active in the last 2 months. At that moment, despite her grim demeanor, Alicia smirked. I didn't tell her that during that time, I had fantastic animalistic sex at least 60 times. Then Alicia continued her story grimly. I just said yes to her. She had such a strange expression on her face and gave me a complicated pregnancy test. After reviewing the results, she said I was in the 3rd week of pregnancy. That instantly stuck with me. It was the date of the end of her leadership training when I released the biggest load of my life into her, and the deepest I'd ever had. I swallowed, twice. Alicia looked me straight in the eyes. If you want me to have an abortion, Blake, I'll do it, she squeezed out. I thought for a few minutes before speaking. I was sure this wasn't what she had planned. I was also sure that the idea of having a child with Alicia was a bad idea in some sense but was either not that bad or actually good in other respects. I gently kissed her lips. It's your body and your choice, Alicia. However, I would prefer for you to keep the baby. It should remain our secret, and I wouldn't be listed on the birth certificate, but I would contribute to his or her upbringing financially and with my time. I would find a way to make it work so Nancy wouldn't find out. Alicia collapsed into my arms, sobbing, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," it seemed to repeat 100 times. I stroked her head. When she regained composure, I broke the bad news to her, for her, not for myself. That Nancy had finally come to her senses. Tomorrow might be our last day together, darling, I told her. Alicia straightened up, smiled broadly at me despite the tears streaming down her cheeks, and said, "Then I'm taking tomorrow off. If my boss that's you will let me, I'll love you to pieces." I took the afternoon off, just in case Nancy had signed the marriage agreement that evening. As she would need some actions, and I needed a few hours to recover. On Tuesday evening, Nancy handed me the marriage agreement with a shy smile on her face. I returned to the master bedroom. That night, we made love tenderly, and the next morning, we engaged in passionate sex. I was surprised at how easily Nancy and I returned to our former life. The wonderful life before that fateful Monday. One reason was that she definitely became less stubborn and no longer felt the need to win every argument. Overall, she became softer. This, combined with my exceptional sexual relationship with Alicia while Nancy and I were estranged, allowed me to truly forget about her infidelity. Everything worked out for everyone involved. Alicia gave birth to a healthy, happy boy, my only son. Believe it or not, after some hints from my side and Nancy's suggestion, despite my disbelief that she knew I was the father, I attended natural childbirth classes with Alicia and was in the delivery room. 3 years later, Nancy got a place at university. Alicia was undoubtedly the best marketing assistant and then marketing director I ever had. When the company we worked for was sold, and I received windfall profits from my stock options, I retired without any financial worries at a ripe old age. I recommended Alicia for the position of vice president of marketing. The transitional team was smart enough to accept my recommendation. As I write this, I am a stay-at-home dad. Alicia and her 3 kids live a block away, and I look after her children and mine when they are not in school, while I pursue what I always dreamed of, writing the great American novel. All the adults are very happy, and all the children are well adjusted. You may ask if I ever had sex with Alicia again? You can ask, but I won't answer.